Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on all the recent talk, the proposals flying around about the future of Ukraine. We've got reports here outlining different negotiation strategies, and, well, it sounds like the atmosphere isn't exactly friendly.
Not at all, it seems.
So our mission today is to, cut through some of that noise. We want to understand the main points being discussed, the different perspectives based on what's being reported.
Okay.
So let's unpack this. It sounds like things got pretty tense right off the bat.
Yeah, that's one of the first things that jumps out. The friction in those recent talks, U.S. and Ukrainian delegations. Apparently, the meeting back on Friday, April 11th, it wasn't just a standard discussion.
No.
Sources are saying the atmosphere was quite hostile. Antagonistic, even.
Wow. So what sparked that? What made it so tense?
Well, the reports seem to point towards the U.S. proposal itself.
Okay.
It's being called Maximalist. And that seems to be the root cause of the tension.
Maximalist. Okay, so what does that mean in this context? What was in this proposal?
It seems the core of it revolves around Ukraine's natural resources, significant ones.
Right, mineral deposits and things like that.
Exactly. The proposal reportedly lays out privileged U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral deposits. But here's the kicker. All the income, the revenue from these resources, wouldn't go straight to Ukraine.
Oh, where would it go?
Into a joint fund. And that fund would be controlled really by the U.S.
Managed by the U.S. Okay, so it's not just about access, it's financial control too. That's quite something.
It suggests a long-term economic interest. And there was more.
Go on.
Something described as an Easter egg in the proposal.
An Easter egg, like a hidden clause.
Sort of, yeah. An unexpected demand. It was about the Gazprom gas pipeline, one running through Ukraine to Europe.
Okay, what about it?
The U.S. reportedly demanded that control of that pipeline be transferred.
Transferred? To whom? To the U.S.?
Well, the proposal suggested the International Development Finance Corporation, that's a U.S. government agency, would manage it. So effectively, U.S. oversight.
Wow, so minerals and a major energy pipeline, that's a very broad scope.
It definitely signals a significant strategic interest, moving beyond just resources.
So how did Kiev take all this? The resources, the pipeline?
Yeah.
What was the reaction?
Predictably, not good. Overwhelmingly negative, according to reports.
I can imagine.
One official apparently compared it to, like, Ukraine had lost a war to the U.S. and was now forced to pay lifelong reparations.
Lifelong reparations. That's incredibly strong language.
It really is. It shows just how imbalanced they felt the proposal was, how deep the concern is.
And were others saying similar things?
Yes. Other sources familiar with it retortedly called it robbery. Just straight up robbery.
Robbery. Okay. So a feeling of being taken advantage of, perhaps. Betrayed.
That seems to be the sentiment, yeah. Deep unease about the terms being offered.
So what's Ukraine doing about it? Are they just accepting this or pushing back?
They're pushing back. They've reportedly hired Hogan Lovells, a major international law firm, as external legal consultants for these talks.
Bringing in the lawyers. That definitely signals they're taking this very seriously.
Absolutely. They're likely preparing a detailed response, looking at all the legal angles.
And there are more meetings coming up, right?
Yes. The Ukrainian Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, the Finance Minister, Serhiy Marchenko, and others. They're due in Washington later in April.
For what? More talks on this?
For World Bank and IMF meetings. But you can bet these issues will be high on the agenda during that visit. It could be a crucial moment.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, let's shift perspectives. What about the U.S. side? Why put forward such an assertive proposal? What's the thinking?
Well, there are reports that President Trump suspects Ukraine might try to sort of wriggle out of any deal, avoid an agreement.
Okay.
And he apparently warned of big problems if that happens. So it suggests a strong push to get some kind of deal done, maybe on terms favorable to the U.S.
Right. A pressure tactic, perhaps?
Could be. And there's another layer to this from the U.S. side involving energy again.
Oh, not the Ukrainian pipeline this time.
No, Nord Stream 2.
Nord Stream 2, but wasn't that, shelved?
Controversial.
Hugely controversial, yes. But there are reports suggesting some efforts, maybe behind the scenes, to potentially restart it.
Restart Nord Stream 2? Who's involved in that?
The reports mention Matthias Warnig, the former executive director of the project, and apparently this idea has some support within the Trump administration.
That seems surprising, given everything. What's the logic behind potentially reviving Nord Stream 2 now?
It's complex. Part of the reported thinking is about the future, maybe restoring relations with Russia down the line.
How would Nord Stream 2 help with that?
The idea reportedly, is that if the U.S. were somehow involved in managing it, maybe through oversight, it could make Russia a more reliable partner in the future, perhaps.
Using it as leverage, potentially. Leverage, or maybe a strategic asset for future peace talks over Ukraine itself. The thinking might be that American involvement adds a layer of accountability.
It's a very roundabout strategy, if that's the case, involving energy, diplomacy, future leverage.
Multi-layered, definitely.
Yeah.
And it seems these aren't just internal discussions.
Meaning?
There are reports that the U.S. Special Envoy Richard Grenell has been making unofficial trips to Switzerland.
Switzerland for what?
To discuss a potential Nord Stream 2 deal, specifically about Russian gas supplies to Germany.
So these talks are happening on multiple fronts involving different players.
It certainly looks that way, a very intricate picture.
Okay, so we have the resource proposal, the Nord Stream 2 angle, but there are other ideas floating around too, right? Different approaches.
Yes, completely different concepts. One that's getting attention is from U.S. Special Representative General Keith Kellogg.
General Kellogg, what's his idea?
He's reportedly suggested dividing Ukraine, actually dividing it, almost like Berlin after World War II.
Dividing Ukraine, like physically, that's a huge step.
A very significant proposal, yes. A totally different direction than the economic focus we were just discussing.
How would that work? What are the specifics of Kellogg's idea?
His concept centers on creating a demilitarized zone, a DMZ, along the current front line.
Okay, a buffer zone. How wide?
15 kilometers on each side, so 30-kilometer wide buffer. And he also pointed to the Dnieper River.
The river
as a potential natural barrier, a strategic line. He suggested European forces could be stationed behind the Dnieper.
European forces, did he say which ones?
He mentioned an Anglo-French contingent, British and French troops.
Why them specifically?
His reported reasoning was that, given Ukraine's size, those forces might not be seen as too provocative by Russia, compared to maybe, say, American troops directly.
Interesting calculation.
Yeah, and he also reportedly advised France and Britain basically plan for the worst. Don't just assume U.S. support will always be there.
That's quite blunt. A warning about relying on the U.S.
It seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
A comment on the potential limits of U.S. long-term commitment.
So Kellogg proposes this division, this DMZ. Does he think it would actually hold? Would a ceasefire last?
He acknowledges ceasefire violations would likely happen. He apparently said these things always happen.
Right.
But he believes they could be easily controlled within that DMZ framework.
And what about Ukraine's future? Politically, elections, does he address that?
He does. He suggests that once you have a stable ceasefire and this defined solution, the division, then you could hold elections.
Which are overdue, right?
Yeah, nearly a year overdue, but postponed because of the war, obviously. Kellogg thinks President Zelensky would be ready for elections once things stabilize.
And who decides?
Kellogg emphasizes that's up to the Ukrainian people and their parliament, not for outsiders to dictate.
Okay, so maintaining some element of Ukrainian agency there. But the big question, would Russia ever agree to this division, this control zone?
Kellogg himself admits Putin may not accept it.
Yeah, that seems like a major hurdle.
A huge one. It highlights how difficult any plan like this would be to implement. But it's significant because it's reportedly the first time a high-ranking U.S. official has suggested the Dnieper as a potential dividing line.
So it marks a potential shift in thinking, at least from some quarters in the U.S.?
Potentially, yes. But it's not the only viewpoint within the administration.
Right. You mentioned differing perspectives. What else is being proposed?
Well, there are reports about separate talks involving the Special Envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. He was apparently talking with Russia, too, focused on stopping the fighting. General Kellogg wasn't part of those specific discussions.
Okay, Witkoff's talks. What was his approach? Also division.
No, something quite different. Witkoff reportedly suggested a faster path to peace might be for President Trump to simply recognize Russia's claims.
Recognize Russian claims? To which territories?
To Donbass, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. Basically concede those areas to Russia to end the war quickly.
Wow. That's radically different from Kellogg's idea. One involves division with oversight, the other involves territorial concessions.
Exactly. A stark contrast in strategy.
And throughout all these different U.S. proposals, what has Russia itself been saying? What are their consistent demands?
Russia's position hasn't really changed much, according to reports. They demand a full withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Donbass, Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
Okay, withdrawal first.
Yes. And recognition of Russian sovereignty over those regions, plus Crimea, of course.
Right, Crimea too.
And critically, they maintain that any NATO troops in Ukraine are unacceptable. A red line for them.
So, putting it all together, we've got U.S. proposals about resources and pipelines causing friction with Ukraine, then alternative U.S. ideas about dividing the country or even conceding territory, and Russia sticking to its demands for withdrawal and recognition. It's a mess.
It's an incredibly complex web, yeah. Competing interests, maximalist demands, starkly different visions for the future, very volatile.
If you step back, what does this all tell us about the prospects for peace?
Well, it underscores just how incredibly difficult finding any common ground is right now.
Yeah.
The fact that you have such different ideas coming even from within the U.S. side shows the lack of consensus on how to proceed.
Yeah.
And Ukraine's strong negative reaction to that initial proposal shows they won't just accept any terms.
Especially terms they see as undermining their sovereignty.
Exactly. They're digging in, getting legal help. Those upcoming meetings in Washington, they could be very telling.
Yeah. Critical, perhaps.
But the fundamental disagreements between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, those are massive obstacles. A quick resolution seems unlikely.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive into a very tangled and fast-moving situation. We've looked at the reported friction in the U.S.-Ukraine talks.
The hostility there.
The details of those U.S. proposals on minerals and the gas pipeline.
And Kyiv's reaction, reparations. Robbery.
Right. Then the alternative ideas like Kellogg's division plan along the Dnieper, Witkoff's reported suggestion of concessions.
And contrasted that with Russia's consistent demands.
It really paints a picture of just how complex and high stakes these discussions are.
Absolutely. The implications for Ukraine's sovereignty, its future, and just regional stability in general, they're huge. It's hard to overstate the importance of how this unfolds.
Indeed. It leaves us with this final thought. Just consider the sheer complexity of all these competing proposals and the profound, potentially permanent consequences they could have, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire geopolitical landscape. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.